and I think we're heading towards critical mass. Maybe a few more folks will duck in as we go, but I'm sure they can figure out what's going on. So first of all, welcome everybody. I'm your host, Jocelyn Goldfein, and I'm delighted to welcome you to another edition of Zetta Bytes Live. I'm one of the partners here at Zetta, and where we write the first institutional check into AI-first startups solving business problems. We believe that technology powered by data will reshape business as we know it. And Zetta Bytes Live is a new program organized around showcasing those stories. So we'll feature deep dives into state-of-the-art in AI platforms. We'll share successful applications of AI with top industry leaders like our guest today. Venkat Chary is the CEO and co-founder of Zenon, which helps enterprises achieve their strategic goals in data analytics and AI. And Venkat was well prepared to start that business because his previous gig was as the chief data and analytics officer for American Express. At Amex, Venkat, you were there for over 20 years. You used data and analytics to drive innovation, to drive revenue growth, the bottom line. And as the first growth-oriented chief data officer in financial services, you fully transformed Amex from legacy platforms to modern big data and ML infrastructure, and I think had a really outsized impact on the business, which I hope we get to hear about today. For those in the audience, Venkat is actively involved as an angel investor and advisor to startups, and is a big advocate for diversity in education and in the workplace. So tons of topics of mutual interest between us, and Venkat, I could not be happier to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Really appreciate being on Zetta Bytes Live, and thank you for all the partnership over the years. And Jocelyn and I have known each other for almost a decade now, so appreciate being here.
Who's counting?
Glad to be. I am. I'm a data guy. I count.
Yes, right. That's true. We count everything. So, okay. So count this. Do you remember when you were first exposed to machine learning and AI? When? It's got to be more than a decade. When and how did you know it was going to be a difference maker?
Yeah, I think the first part is different than the second part. I think for the first part, really, I think we all grew up on science fiction. So for me, Star Trek may have been my first exposure to AI and machine learning, or Isaac Asimov. So whatever we're reading at the time or whatever we're watching, that was a future. And is that future ever going to be real? And when is it going to be a difference maker? I don't know if we thought it would be in our lifetimes. We always hoped. But I think it's fantastic that we are able to see the beginnings of a transformation, the beginnings of value add to society, the beginnings of, I would say, more human machine augmentation, which is really going to make a difference to the future. For me personally, if you think of a professional career, when I joined American Express back in the day, 1998, we were on tapes. And our first request would be kind of load up the tapes onto the mainframe before I could even extract data or run a model. And so things were painful back then. It would take a really long time, just waiting hours for a tape to get loaded. And now we're at a stage where everything's real time, data's in the cloud, pretty amazing. So when you look at kind of how time has progressed, machine learning and real-time data may have had a lot of use in the early 2000s in ad tech and search. For Amex, we'd been using it on legacy systems, which are real-time fraud assessments, real-time credit assessments for many, many decades, right? So maybe even 30, 40 years. However, if you look at how those models were built, they were built on samples of data. Because if you tried to process the entire model or build a model on the full sample of data, even as recent as 10 years ago, SAS on Teradata, it would just collapse. It would just bend after weeks and weeks of trying to sort through the process. And so machine learning and compute in the cloud, or compute even with GPUs, huge game changer for a company like American Express. And we can talk about the applications later, but I think that's when things change, is when you saw that this has real world application. It's transforming everyone on a daily basis. It's transformational, not just B2B, but B2C. And we've really seen that in the last decade. So I think it's real.
I was blown away when you first told me that Amex had been using machine learning and data science for decades. I think I'm like most people probably, when I think of the first production uses of machine learning, I think of FANG companies. I think of the Netflix prize in 2009. I think of the Facebook newsfeed in 2010. So it's almost mind-boggling that it was in internal use so much earlier. What do you think led banks to be such early adopters?
I think necessity. I think when you look at the business model, the margins are slim and you have to be able to deploy things at scale. If you're making 2%, 2.5% on a transaction and you're losing 2.5% on credit and fraud, which has happened to quite a few banks, and we saw that during the recession, the last big one, right? Wasn't pretty. You're forced to innovate. And I think what we're seeing now is the difference between forced to innovate versus wanting to innovate and wanting to transform and wanting to be a leader in the field. I think 10, 20 years ago, banks were really resting on some easy money, right? Cash was flowing in, proprietary systems, legacy systems. You couldn't deploy a real-time transaction processing platform without investing hundreds of millions, let alone billions of dollars. So if you wanted to start that, very challenging to do that. Now, frankly, if you actually wanted to do it, you could do it. And it's very different. The barriers to entry have collapsed. Yeah. Which forces innovation.
Yeah. So maybe the FANGs can take a little credit for that.
Absolutely.
But so you lived through the 20 years you spent at Amex, you sort of lived through this journey from we're forced to innovate in order to survive to, hey, we now have an engine for innovation that we can use to lead. Can you talk through just some of the, I can't believe I'm asking you to answer this as one question, but like, what were some of the highlights, the big wins from that period along the way? And like that had business impact, not just personal, wins.
Yeah. I think if you let's go through kind of the premise of machine learning. You can build a model on 100% of the data that you have. The larger the data set, no problem. The ability to compute through it, process through it, no problem. So imagine decisions which are being made with a lot less data. And now suddenly you're piling on a lot of data, a lot of signals that you can now kind of predict things better. And so we moved from, in the time I was there, I remember in the year 2000 implementing some of the first rules to approve transactions on credit cards which are over limit or transactions which were delinquent, but using a risk-based methodology. And it was completely a rules implementation. And we're basically writing rules in a platform to do something that is completely suboptimal. And 10 years later, we're using more and more models and rules got replaced by models. They were logistic models or regression models. They weren't machine learning models. And again, they weren't built on 100% of the data. Then you come into 2012, and the first application of big data at American Express was Amex offers, which is how do we personalize these credit card offers for our customers? Why? Because when you have millions of merchants and hundreds of offers and millions of card members, it's not a problem you can solve with logistic regression. Yeah. It's a problem that can only be solved with collaborative filtering or matrix factorization. And so you're forced into a construct where the problem you want to solve can only be solved by the tools of back then the future, but tools which are commonplace now. And so Netflix was using it, Google was using it, everyone was using it. So how do we bring this to American Express to solve this problem? Because there's no other way to solve it. So we built the infrastructure to solve Amex offers. And then we scaled it to solve things like fraud, things like credit risk and response modeling and lifetime value modeling. And you're using 100% of the data now. And when you go from using a 5% sample for fraud models to 100% sample, and fraud is not a common occurrence. Credit risk is a much more common occurrence. Right. It improves the quality of the model significantly, the accuracy of the model to capture it. So not only are you capturing more fraudsters or fraudulent transactions, but you're not stopping good spending, which is equally important. You're not disrupting.
I'm not getting my card declined when I'm perfectly legitimate. I'm just on a trip.
exactly. And Amex is a unique place in that Amex is the network. So it's like Visa and MasterCard, it has network data.
Mhm.
It is also the issuer, so it has a direct relationship with the customer. And in many, many cases, at least back then, we're also the acquirer of the merchant. So we had the data stream there. So you had all three data streams and you could put them together in unique ways to create better features for modeling. So people wanted to join the company because we were doing kind of great work and had access to great data.
Yeah. We'll talk about recruiting in a moment because I think everybody's interested in that. But I've definitely seen that too, that one of the biggest magnets to great data science talent is just great troves of data. And that's a really good point that Amex was sort of uniquely positioned with more end-to-end life cycle of data. That's pretty exciting. One thing we also want to share with our audience, is what the challenges are, and sort of not, everything's not just up and to the right. Some of these projects, are bad targets for ML, or there's best practices to make projects go well, and when you don't have those lessons learned, you may not succeed. And I'm curious if you have any sort of reflections or lessons to share about those kinds of challenges, and what makes these projects difficult, and what can people do about it?
Yeah. Listen, it wasn't easy at American Express. I was their head of data and analytics from 2012 to 2018, 6 years, and probably took 4 or 5 years to make the transformation happen. I don't know if it could have been done faster. It probably could have been this day and age. It probably should have been done faster, but you're dealing with, and you work with large enterprises, this is kind of what you're dealing with. Legacy technology built over very long periods of time, legacy processes, and legacy people and culture, plus the motivation to deliver business results on a quarterly basis. So governed by the quarterly financial results regimen, which forces you to build things quickly and not necessarily for the future always. And so almost everything in the end, even if I look at the successes, when I first built Amex offers, we hard coded the entire algorithm into production. And then 6 months later, it was like, here's a set of changes that we want to make, given what we learned after we implemented based on customer behavior. Instead of taking 2-3 weeks to make the changes, it was going to take us like 3 months to make the changes. Eventually, we figured it out and built a more modular, flexible deployment system where we could make the changes. But the impetus needs to be there. The reasons needs to be there, right?
Yeah.
One of the failures, I'll say as an example, is American Express knows everything about their customers, right? They know where they're spending, when they're spending, what they're spending on, and they can also look at cohorts of customers and really understand them well, given where they live, given where they travel, etc. So Amex is prime and well positioned to give recommendations to its users on everything under the sun. However, we couldn't get it off the ground. And the reason is it's a lot of priorities at a company like Amex. There's a lot of siloed teams, there's a lot of decision makers, and there's not necessarily the incentives that a startup would have. And so when you look at the last 3 years, Amex acquired Resi, Amex acquired Mezi. They're both recommender platforms which are consumer facing. And now all they have to do is kind of feed their data into those existing platforms and make it work versus trying to build those platforms themselves. So it just goes to show some of the challenges that you have. And it's beyond just technology. It's really about culture and people.
Yeah. Well, this is the advantage that startups have, is that they don't have that,
You have no other priority. Your
They
priority is your company.
know the priority they have. Well, they just have one job, as opposed to many jobs, and they
Exactly.
just have one agenda as opposed to many agendas that have to sort of compromise.
I can't tell you as chief data and analytics officer how many times I got pulled into conversations with regulators about data.
Yeah.
It's a distraction.
Yeah.
Right? If you're trying to drive growth for the company.
It's a constraint too, right? I mean, it's not just the time you spend, it's the actual restrictions they put on you.
Exactly.
a startup's flying under that radar. But I think this is something that startups should know and really understand, which is one of the reasons they can sometimes serve enterprises. Why an enterprise really can't build it for themselves isn't because the technology is too hard or that the enterprise, doesn't have the software engineers or the data scientists, but it is because the startup has the benefit of focus.
Exactly.
And so what else should startups know about how big enterprises think about innovation? And what advice would you give to startups selling
Yeah.
into enterprises?
I think many of you probably know this on the call, but large enterprises, they're focused on their priorities. And then they trickle down those goals and priorities for every calendar year down to every person. So every person has their priorities. It cascades down, right? And then it ladders up. And then budgets and planning all happen Q3, Q4 of the prior year. So entering in the middle of the year and trying to get something done in the middle of the year, if it's not on the priority list, it's not going to fly. So how do you find the person whose priorities and goals matches the product that you're focused on? And how do you find the company that is actually prioritizing it for that year or is interested in doing a pilot or has capacity to do a pilot so that they can prioritize it the next year? And companies are focused on different things. And people and departments in companies are focused on different things. Some person might be focused on cost reduction, another might be focused on regulation, another might be focused on growth, another might be focused on customer experience. And what is that priority? And frankly, the implementation issues and buy-in issues are real. People really do need to syndicate stuff across multiple teams and organizations, and they're not a lot of times capable of making the decision or able to even make the decision on their own.
Yeah.
And implementation, as much, reducing the friction is super important. So really being honest about yourself, honest to yourself about how much friction is it to get your product running or to do a pilot, whether that's organizational friction, technology friction, other friction that might exist. How do you eliminate that versus make it really, really small? And as an entrepreneur now myself, one who is providing mostly services, but also building solutions and building products that can scale across these companies, it is very, very important to reduce friction. And sometimes we don't understand the friction unless we have enough conversations or enough customer interviews to really understand how things get implemented and how their processes work, and convincing those people to spend the time with you to open up and communicate to you the challenges, I think is very, very important. And Jocelyn and I have many conversations about, there's a product that I'm currently working on, and in that space, prior products have not been, there's a lot of companies that have tried to crack this space.
Yeah.
And those companies have not been successful. And when I talk to a lot of the end users at a lot of companies, they just say they don't understand my legacy process or the legacy way in which I have to operate this in. Not that I'm tied into it, but at least that understanding would help me make the transition, so to speak, versus I won't have the ability to rip the Band-Aid off of this one. So
yeah, I think one question VCs commonly ask that I think sometimes annoys founders is, why has nobody done this before now? But if you don't have a really good answer to that question, you don't necessarily know what's the real stumbling block. And I think it's easy to be in love with your idea and not stop to wonder, has someone else had this idea? And if so, what got in their way? So I think that getting that kind of insight of what it takes to get this implemented with the customers is
yeah, and it doesn't have to be one thing. I think we're operating in a new world of technology and data and innovation. And so in the past, it was always, hey, if I do this, it's going to drive it's going to make it faster, but the decision is actually going to be worse. The one thing with AI and automation is that decisions are actually better and the cycle time is lower. So you're getting all the benefits at once. It's not a trade-off the way it used to be. And again, it's not as expensive as it used to be either. So enterprises are seeing that difference. Now it's really a question of what can, the usual buy, build, partner, And then it's a question of why should they buy? Why should they partner?
Yeah.
And what drives that decision? And how do they see what is a core priority for them versus something that's a distraction for them? And frankly, if you look at a lot of large enterprises, where they're investing people and time and effort, it's not core to their business, and they don't want to. So if startups and entrepreneurs can help alleviate that for them, they are in to that.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the first things that made a big impression on me about you, Venkat, is, obviously the sort of your stature, the leadership, the responsibilities you held, but then also that you were willing and open to talk with startups and to take those introductions. And that I can think of Amex and your team actually being an early design partner to several startups I can think of. So how did you, when you were in that driver's seat, when you were deciding, should I champion, should I sponsor, how did you personally think about those build or buy decisions, and what made you pick a startup versus homegrown or a more established provider?
Yeah, I think it sounds very complimentary of you, but I will say I wasn't quite as open as I've been in the last decade, in the prior decade. And it didn't start that way. And it got there over time, and my mindset changed, the industry matured, right? We were living in a pre-cloud era, and then there was cloud, and then cloud became more mature. And if you think of what people were selling to me in early 2000, expensive solutions that were proprietary, that once I bought, I would be stuck with for a very long time.
Yeah.
Now it's the exact opposite. Not very expensive, but still, people are making money, which is great. It's important.
Well, and not a huge capital outlay for you up front, because it's hosted,
exactly. Not capital up front. No forced integration. Yes, lock in, but not as terrible as in the past, right? Obviously, people want stickiness. I don't blame them. But a lot of this is really about culture. And I think American Express was different. Our CEO is Ken Chenault. Ash Gupta led risk and information management. Ken would be in the Valley all the time, and he mentored many of the CEOs of some of the top technology companies. And he'd come back and ask questions. He'd say, well, how is this possible there? Why is that not possible here? We started Amex Ventures in 2012. It was on University Avenue in one of the old Facebook buildings, right? So we immediately felt connected. We were super early. Amex invested in Plaid at Series A. Amazing. Right? So it's the cultural change. And when that starts trickling down, everybody in the company is questioning, why can't we do this? What is stopping us? And understanding, how can we partner? What are the internal constraints? What should we do ourselves? And how do we do it quickly? And so it's really about mindset. And I understand when you're talking to enterprises and you're with the wrong individual, it can be hard to change mindset. But I think if you look at many of the top enterprises in the world, they are hiring people from the outside. They are hiring people with the right mindset. They are trying to transform. And so I think we're going to see those changes very quickly over time. The other comment I would make is technology and machine learning, these are tools. And so how do you transform them into a product is very different than saying I have AI, or I have a data-driven product, or I have an AI-driven product. People really care about the business outcome you're producing. What is the value that you're creating for them? And then they're more interested in the how of it, and why the how of it is something that they may not be able to do on their own. And that's unique that you're bringing it, or being able to tie different things together in a way that they couldn't do on their own. But it's really about the business value, because 30 years ago it was logistic regression and mainframe, and now it's cloud and it's machine learning. But tomorrow it's going to be something else. But we're all going to be sitting here solving the same business problems, like how do I acquire more customers, or how do I create more efficiency, or how do I service them better, or whatever it is, right? So
Yep. And so just for that, but I've got one or two more questions that I'm dying to ask Venkat, and I will. But if you folks want to start posting your questions for Venkat, I will roll over and start asking them in a couple minutes. So feel free to submit them either via the Q&A. I'll try to keep an eye on chat. Chat's sort of rolling with conversation, but if you get it into the Q&A panel, I'll definitely see it. So let me give folks a chance to warm up their typing fingers. And in the meantime, I will ask Venkat another question of my own, which is, I'm kind of, as you know, this sort of data privacy and kind of the regulation of AI and data is very interesting to me. I'm trying to keep my finger on the pulse. One of your jobs at Amex under the data umbrella was that you were the head of global privacy. And so you've thought deeply about, consumer rights to data privacy, and you have probably spent more time than you want with regulators talking about it. So I would love your opinion on kind of the status of regulation of data privacy today. Like, what's your opinion on where we have it right? Where are the gaps where we're not protecting consumers enough, or where is it overkill and redundant? And maybe stifling business? Like, what's the path forward in your perspective?
Yeah, given that my role at Amex was a growth-oriented role, at the same time I had the balance of data governance and privacy while I was in a growth-oriented role, and really helping the company balance the two. And it's very hard to say if what is being regulated and the way it's being regulated is right or wrong. You can take both opinions on it. But I think where I end up on a lot of these things, I'll give some preamble, but we talked about this. If it's so addictive, you can regulate the hell out of it, but it's not going to make a difference. I don't think it's made that much of a difference when it comes to something like Facebook or Instagram. People are very addicted. They want to be on those platforms. And the comment that everybody makes is, if giving up your privacy gives you enough value, I think you're okay giving up privacy. Yes, a lot of it was being done in a maybe sneaky way, but less and less so with regulations, and companies are trying to do better because of external pressures from investors and social pressures. But if you're using Google Maps and you want to know how to get to wherever you're going, you're not going to say, I'm not going to give you my location. It's not going to really help you, right? On the other hand, algorithmic bias is a big problem. And everybody spends a lot of time on Twitter and other places like talking about algorithmic bias and how something is biased and not biased. But the reason I'm not saying I'm okay with algorithmic bias, but I look at algorithmic bias and say, hey, it can actually be monitored, it can be regulated, it can be audited, it can be improved.
Yeah.
How could you ever fix the behavior of a single human loan officer in a small town that was rejecting mortgage applications for underserved people? Yeah. So AI may be causing issues right now, but it scales and it can be fixed by probably more AI monitoring it in a scalable way. We are moving. I
too am a techno optimist. Like, I too think that algorithmic bias, like as bad as it is, like you can fix that. It's hard to fix I think more easily than human bias.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to fix bad actors, and even then you can have AI monitoring bad actors. I understand AI has its issues, yes, but I think still better off. We're moving to an opt-in world. Who doesn't say yes when you get that little thing that says accept cookies? What was the point of that? Yeah. So maybe there's no point of that, but it makes somebody somewhere feel better. But either way, we are trading off privacy for value. So now the question is, are we valuing some things too much, or are we undervaluing our privacy until it matters? And in the case of social media, maybe it's mental health, maybe there's other considerations which aren't quite clear. And particularly for maybe individuals in their society who are not capable of making decisions yet if they're younger and so on. Regulation is important. There's a place for these things. There's a place for government, but there's also a balance that, in the end, we used to say at American Express, and I think this is something all companies try to follow. We're not doing this because the law says we have to do it. We're not doing this because regulators say we're having to do this. We are holding ourselves to the standard of what our customers expect from us, which should be, frankly, a higher standard than the other two.
Yeah.
One can hope, right?
Absolutely. We're starting to get a couple questions trickle in, and so let me So let me ask this first one. You talked earlier about credit risk being one of the earliest and most important use cases for machine learning. And
Yeah.
Carlton in our audience would like to know, especially in the context of point of sale credit solutions that are popping up, how is ML being used in underwriting, and what kinds of improvements is it driving?
Yeah, I think when you think of point of sale solutions, they're passing on the credit risk. So if you think of someone like PayPal and a point of sale solution of PayPal or Square, they're acting as an intermediary. They're able to provide an amazing front end experience for their user, which is, let's say, a small business in a particular case. And then they're routing the transaction through American Express, MasterCard, and Visa. So in the end, MasterCard and Visa are sending that to the bank, which is, let's say, Capital One or Citibank. And Citibank and Capital One, et cetera, are going to have to make decisions on that transaction from a credit perspective when the card is swiped. Amex will make its own decision on that. So ML is heavily used to make all of those decisions in terms of assessing the risk and approving or declining that transaction, or later on granting or reducing credit to that particular individual. The question is really the data flows and the disintermediation. So if you're paying with Apple Pay or Google Pay, or you're going through Square, or you're going through PayPal, what data is being received at the endpoint by an American Express, a Citibank, a Cap One? And is that data going to be disintermediated in the future? Is that data partially disintermediated now? Who controls the data? Who controls the customer? Who controls the experience? And these are the things that give people leverage in the system. But as far as the endpoint is concerned, they're using machine learning to make decisions right now, depending on the data flows that they're getting.
Super cool.
Primarily it's GBM across almost all the banks right now. That's become the standard for fraud and credit.
Great. And then I've got an attendee here who just wants to know if the recording will be available later. And yes, we always post the recordings on our website, and we'll publicize them, on social faster, or you can wait till next month's newsletter for the link. But they go up on our website. It just takes a little bit of delay while we get them done. But we will definitely post this. And then I wanted to also, Venkat, give you a chance to talk about what you're doing. We spent so much time talking about American Express, but I don't want to sort of gloss over the fact that you're on to the next big thing. You're leading a startup of your own. Can you tell us Zenon's kind of, I think every startup has like a superhero origin story, something that made you who you are. What made you take the plunge? What's the mission here?
I don't know. Maybe it's a very commonplace superhero origin story, which is, working in a large company for many, many years, there's only so much innovation I could drive. I wanted to work with a wider set of industries. I wanted to do a couple of things which are actually in conflict with each other, and no company that gave me a job would actually let me do all of those things at the same time. And I'll try to talk about some of those things. As an example, if I wanted to advise like 10 different startups, getting approvals for that alone is a nightmare if you work in a corporation. And that's something that's a big part of my life, and I wanted to delve into that more. But Zenon came out of, I left American Express in 2018. I took a year exploring. I spent time with Zetta, which I still do, advising some of their portfolio companies, helping them with investments. I spent some time with 406 Ventures, which is a partner of Zetta's as well, and I've known those folks for a while as well. They also make data-oriented, AI-oriented investments. And I spent a lot of time with McKinsey as a senior advisor, helping large enterprises with digital transformation, which in this day, digital data transformation is exactly the same thing, pretty much. So what I learned after, in the meantime, I had offers to join some large companies, some small companies, some PE-backed firms. And it was really about, well, what do I want to do? And these large enterprises, as much as I've done a transformation at Amex that took me 6 years, which I thought took way too long. And at the end, I was a little disappointed that I couldn't make more progress. And then I left and spent a year at McKinsey. I was like, wow, I can't believe the incredible progress I made in 6 years. Was kind of the thought there. Is like, why can't these large enterprises figure it out. What is holding them back? And there's always, how do I hire more data engineers? How do I hire more data scientists?
Yeah.
How do I scale the work? It's like, what work do you want to hire a bunch of PhDs or very talented 10x engineers to do? You want them to sit and clean your data for like the 100th time when you should have had it fixed by now? And it's been happening for a very long time, but really the next stage of evolution is don't hire more data engineers and data scientists. Where is your no code, minimal code platforms to help you do things faster? Where is the automation? I mean, I can't tell you, when 20 years at American Express, I'm not disparaging American Express because this is true for every other,
on the contrary, they're a leader.
Company, is every 2 years we'd sit there and say, why is attrition spiking? Who's attriting? Which are the segments which are attriting? What offers should we give them that would be relevant? How do we reduce the attrition in a meaningful, relevant way at the right channel for the right set of customers with the right offers?
And you're talking about customer churn, not employee attrition.
Customer churn, not employee churn. Customer churn.
Yeah.
And every 3 years, some, either it'd be a big project or some consultant would come in, and everything would still be manual. Like, if you are living in this world, day and age, and I can check my stock portfolio every second and it updates every second and I can keep checking it, why can't I check something like how many customers tried it? What's their profile? What do they look like? What's the prediction on who's going to attrite? Update that model if I have to, figure out the offer and optimize the whole thing all the time, and go in and just see if there's a performance issue and tweak it every month versus having a big project every 3 years. There's something wrong with the working model. And so the question was, how do we take AI and how do we take data and make it value generating for large enterprises at scale with automation, underline automation like 50 times, and leave them with something that the only reason they need me to come back is to perform some routine maintenance on something versus some other big project over and over again. So that's the premise of the company. We are building solutions. There's a lot of problems large enterprise face which are stuck in the middle. Manual solutions are a waste of time, we all know that, but they can't be fully automated where it's a product for them yet. Yeah. Maybe in 5 years or 10 years, those will become product solutions that maybe one of you on the call will be offering to them. But right now it's kind of a mix. And so we're helping them build this mix, which is human augmented automation. And then every year we have kind of a focus effort on building 1 or 2 products that we can then scale, which will be fully productized, and working with some VC partners to do that. Zetta is one of them. But last thought I'd just leave you with regarding AI for me. The definition of AI is like how artificial intelligence. How can AI do what humans can do? And for me, it's not about AI doing what humans can do. It's about going beyond that and innovating. We've really brute forced our way into a semblance of AI by pushing more data, pushing more compute. If it's a game of chess, figuring out all the permutations and combinations was kind of the first way, but now it's adversarial again, fine. But I think we're really reaching the phase of AI where elegance will really drive superiority, and the brilliance of the solution will be in the design thinking. And so one of the things that we are focused on as a company is to bring more design thinking, so we solve the problems the best way in a future-proof way. So that's Zenon very quickly, but I think the premise kind of more applies generally. It's less about my company, it's more about what is the future for all of us.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a phenomenal mission statement, and I think that you have the quality that the great founders do, which is absolute passion for the problem you're solving. Well, I hate to bring us back to earth after that, but we've got actually a really good pragmatic question that should be right up your alley. Sitting there inside a startup, Divya asks, what's the litmus test a startup can use to understand if an organization has data readiness? Can, when you meet a potential customer and you think, can I even help this? Are they even ready to be helped? Do they even have the basic foundations? Or is there, if their data is still on tape, maybe I'm going to move on and work with another customer, right? If the data has to be walked uphill 10 miles both ways, hip deep in snow, then maybe I pass and find another customer. So what litmus test do you use? I'm sure you have a great antenna for this.
Yeah, I put a lot of things on a matrix, two sides. I think one is, what is the value you're driving, right? Mm-hmm. And if you can show with clarity, here's the value that you're driving, that's great. That's step one. The other axis is really, what is the feasibility of implementation? And that can be a lot of things: organizational, it could be priorities, it could be integration, it could be readiness from a technology perspective. Data readiness is one of them. And what I would say about data readiness is, you don't need, like, as an example, at American Express, people are like, oh, centralize all the data. Before we can do anything, we need all our data in one place.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Move all the data.
There's plenty of use cases where we have most of the data in one place, but the data scientists would always push, I'm not saying data scientists in general, but there were quite a few data scientists that push back. I'm a data scientist myself, but they will push back on me saying, Venkat, we don't have all the data. I'm like, today, you're trying to build your model. You start with like 5,000 fields, and then you're getting your model down to 50. You want me to give you 100,000 fields, but I have 20,000 ready. Why don't you just get started? And this would be a fight. Can you imagine? This was a fight. This was an uphill battle for me.
Yeah.
And so data readiness really goes to the use case that you're solving. Mm-hmm. So it's not about, do they have all their data ready? It's about, do they have the data ready that your startup or your product needs access to in an easy way? As an example, if you're building a product for procurement, you need access to AP files, GL files, accounting systems, etc. And that data sometimes is not easily accessible, but at a large company. But in a mid-sized company, a lot of them are using off-the-shelf products and tools, which are all API enabled. Great. Maybe it's the wrong market that you're going after, because you have to figure out which companies have easy access to the data readiness that you're looking for that serves your product. And that's a real example, by the way, I gave. So there are many, many such examples. So how do you assess? You just say how many sources do you need to add value? If you're in the procurement example, you could say, oh my God, I need all 10 sources to add value. But you may look at a module inside of your product, and that module to create value only requires 2 data sources. Great, eliminate the friction. Say, I'll do a pilot with you. I can't give you the full value of my product, but I'll give you the value from this module. It only requires these 2 data sets. Does that make your life easier? They're not going to do the thinking for us, unfortunately.
Right.
We are the ones who keep proposing until something goes, they're like, yeah, I can do that. But so the other way never works. It never works. I've tried it. I've been doing business development at not, when it was American Express, I wanted to do business development. Everybody would respond to my emails and phone calls. Now it's like Zenon. They're like, who the hell is this? But it's different learning.
Yeah. I mean, I don't pretend to any expertise in the consumer product market fit journey. But on the B2B side, I can say that the field of dreams approach does not work. It is a trap. If you build it, they will not come. You need to put just as much work into reaching customers with your solution as inventing and building your solution. I think that's a universal. And
showing them the pathway and helping them. You have to innovate for them on the pathway.
Yeah, absolutely.
For reducing friction.
Absolutely. I think we've got, if folks want to ask a few more questions of Venkat, we've got time for a couple more. Please go ahead and use the Q&A panel. But something else I was wondering about, you said earlier, hey, my advice to these enterprise leaders is like, stop trying to hire more data scientists. But at the same time, I got to say, when I talk to enterprise leaders, to people who had your position, the CDO, the most common question they have is how to hire more data scientists, because it is hard. And I fully agree with your prescription about automation. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, we're not going to automate our way
Sure.
out of from startups to mid-sized to growth to enterprise. All of us do need to hire, and it seems harder than ever right now.
Do.
And I wonder, and you've done a ton of it, both at Amex and at Zenon. And so I do wonder if you have any secret sauce to share on the hiring front.
Yeah, hopefully, it starts with passion, right? It's if you're passionate about what you do, you have great problems to solve, interesting problems to solve. That's the first hurdle. Your first hurdle starts with compensation. I think you have a problem, right?
Yeah.
So at Amex, people would take a pay cut or a small pay cut. No one's going to take a large pay cut. Let's be clear. But people might take 10% less to work on something that is very unique and gives them a unique experience. So that's number one. Number two is you got to work your network, and you have to meet people. And it's not, you can't suddenly email somebody out of the blue or text them out of the blue or LinkedIn message them out of the blue saying, hey, remember I met you 4 years ago. What are you up to? I need to hire data scientists.
Yeah.
That's not going to work. So keep everybody warm. And even if it's just sending a message every few months or checking in on them, seeing how things are, and you will catch them at that moment where they're ready to kind of move from whatever they're doing to something different. And then that's your chance.
Yeah.
Because you've been, you should actually have an interest in the person, is what I'm saying. I'm not asking you to fake interest in a person.
Right.
I think you should have a real interest in these people because you want them to be part of something you're passionate about, something important to you, and you want them to feel the same way about it and build that camaraderie, build that culture, build that with them. But yes, it is hard to hire good people, but I'm sure all of us know people. And if you don't know people, you need to network more to find those people and then build warm relationships with them over time. And then at the right time, they will want to work with you because they get to, it's not just about the company and the company purpose and mission. It's also about each of you and how you are and how you relate to these people and what belief they have in you and how they think of you as somebody they want to work with or work for. And that's really important. And it's more than just the work. I have to, I spend a lot of time coaching people, mentoring people, and people that I'm very close to who I've worked with for a decade, who worked for me in Zenon, and a few people wanted to leave, a small set, like we had 3 people leave out of 100. But I'm very supportive of their decisions because we have conversations and I don't act as if they work for me. I act as somebody who's looking out for their best interests. And I've actually helped, at least I've tried to help all 3, but I helped at least one of them land their next gig, right? So I think and maybe I said, great, do this. And if you want to come back, the door's always open, right? People get very upset when people leave their team. They take it personally. That's not how you should take it at all.
Yeah, seen that. Well, I love this advice. I think it's sort of so fundamental to lead through authenticity, and it's so much easier to say it than it is to do it. But I think you really do it. You walk the walk. So
it's hard even for me. That's what I want people to know. It's very hard for all of us, even when people that you look at and say, "Hey, it seems to come easy." We all worked on it.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time working on this, and I'm still not there. I'm trying to improve every day, and so I hope that gives all of you. Saying, hey, I can do this too. And that's the feeling I want you to have.
And, just before we wrap up, one thing I always want to give sort of an open mic to our speakers is, are there any favorite causes that you'd like to shout out that you care about and you just want to kind of put out into the world?
For me, environment is a favorite cause. You pick whatever inside of that you want to do, but that's a favorite cause for me. And treating people right is another favorite cause. And if that means diversity, if that means helping the underserved or people who just haven't had the best chance in life, I think we aim to do that as well. So those are 2 broad categories, but I think broad enough that maybe other people would share my interest.
Well, Venkat, thank you so much. We're incredibly grateful for your time, for your wisdom, and I know that this was educational. And it I think will be greatly helpful both to everybody who is here today and everybody who reads or watches after the fact. So thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for giving me the opportunity, and thanks everyone for joining us today, and really appreciate it.
Happy Wednesday, everybody.
Take care. Bye.